Good evening. Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Truglia, and with me tonight is the esteemed Father Patrick and the esteemed John. Guys, how you doing?
Oh, thank you.
You're doing great. Thank you for the invitation, Craig.
It's a pleasure to have both of you on, but obviously the main star tonight is Father Patrick because he just had a big debate in Pints with Aquinas with William Albrecht on the Immaculate Conception. And let's get right into it. I mean, Father, how do you feel about that debate? How did it go for you?
Well, it was interesting. I think that the theological points I was making weren't really very well addressed, but I probably could have done a lot better on the addressing the patristic material that was there. So it was similar to the debate which I had with Eric Ibarra about the papacy. I come in at a theoretical level and discuss the theology behind it and the ecclesiology, etc. And I just get bombardment of patristic materials which are interpreted to suit them. I think this last night was much the presentation from William. He's got a way of television evangelist style, which comes across.
I just want to send them money. Shut up and take my money. Televangelist, keep going.
Well, not so much that, but he's very charismatic sort of presentation and things. So yes, but substance-wise, if I was working through the debate from my own perspective, did he say anything which would make my reasoning any less? I think that perhaps the fact of being able to admit the growth and holiness of the Mother of God, even having original justice and righteousness, say from that, was a reasonable point. But he never ever really got around to dealing with the difference between in and at and from, which I was bringing up. And the patristic quotes he mentioned were useless for that because it didn't actually talk about that. I actually specifically said, did they actually say that? And they don't. And so that was really my defense against them all. Well, if they don't actually say that, I can interpret them to fit because our opinions are so close. We're talking about something very narrow here. And the point of death, I think he failed to address. He started talking about holy deaths and stuff, and Mary. Some people say Mary chose to die and stuff, but the bottom line comes down to her death, and this was inherited from Adam, would have had to be suicide, even if she gave up her soul. And the only reason, justification for anyone giving up their soul, even voluntarily, is that the body was going to die at some stage, was bound to death, or the body was going to die. And so that wasn't really. So it doesn't matter how holy a death you do. She couldn't die if there was no justification for her death, because she was all holy. So the only justification for her dying at all was an inheritance of death. And I think I didn't hear anything from him that actually really addressed what I think is a fundamental critique of it, which in the end, in my closing statement, I said is basically blasphemous to start talking about her dying if she hadn't inherited a death from Adam. Because if she was the mother of life, she shouldn't die. She would just be translated straight into heaven. But he did admit that she died. And so that was a key thing I brought out from him, that was death, because I think that really hinges, the whole argument really hinges on the fact that she died. There's a whole anthropological and a theological basis about how do you understand original sin here. And my impressionistic sense is that the Roman Catholic theology has very much, it's human-centered. So in other words, a human has attributes, powers, things to make them good, to make them holy. So it's something given to a human. It's a righteousness, a thing that's accredited to the human being as theirs, and a stain when they fall that is corrupting them. And this sort of idea of thinking is what's lying behind the Immaculate Conception. It's behind all his thinking. That's why he reacted against what I was saying so vehemently, because he understands there's some sort of corruption of the divine nature, of our image of God. Whereas Orthodoxy, the whole issue is about our participation in the divine energies, the divine grace, the power of God to exist. And it's the theological issue is a union with the one. It's the union with one is pure and without division. And this separation separates you from the energies. Without that, we collapse into death and non-existence.
And just to interject, that requires an understanding of St. Maximus, the Damascene. That's a larger theoretical point, which in your presentation, you almost took for granted that someone would already have a sufficient knowledge of patristics to understand that. But in a debate format where someone is looking almost for just whoever will give the most condensed proof text wins, that almost demands from the audience a better background in anthropology than, let's be honest, than even a lot of popular Orthodox teachers talk about this. So that is definitely an issue in the presentation on your behalf.
Yes, it gets a bit tricky. I would have to go through Dionysius Purgite and St. Maximus.
Oh, yes.
And St. Gregory Palamas and all the Cappadocian fathers and things like this to build it all up. I mean, in the 15-minute soundbite, it's almost impossible to do that. Yes, there may be a way of presenting that, but at the same time, 15 minutes is not a lot to just get the basic framework out. And the discussion, even 20 minutes.
Well, let me ask you guys this. Neither of you are Americans, but in America, we choose our president based upon a 30-second soundbite. And if he goes 2 seconds over 30 seconds, he broke the rules and they cut off his mic in a debate. Now, when your political leaders have a debate, how long generally do they have to present an idea?
Well, it depends what sort of debate they're doing, but it's probably a lot longer than 30 seconds.
How about in Greece?
I have not followed so much Greek politics.
All right. How about in Sweden?
Well, it's I will say it's because it's the it's broadcast on the television. It's always not a lot of amount of time, but they're not cutting the mic off, if like you described.
So they have 30 seconds to make a point, a minute, 3 minutes?
Usually 30 seconds.
All right, so that's the Swedes have that problem too. That's why the society's falling apart, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the point is, you said, oh, well, only a 15-minute soundbite. Well, Father, if you have 15 minutes to talk about anything in a Western entertainment context, which is really what these debates are, let's be honest, that's exceptionally rare. That's like Lincoln Douglas style debates.
Yes. Well, but I'll talk on for hours and hours.
I remember our episode on the validity of holy orders and sacraments. And I remember that. Just give Father Patrick time to talk. So let's for a moment break it up. We'll get back to you, Father. John, you are a popular YouTuber. You are a real Greek Orthodox person. I presume the real people you see don't believe in the Immaculate Conception. That's not some Protestant conversion thing, right? That's something that exists among Greeks, I imagine.
No, we don't believe in the Immaculate Conception.
But are you sure you're not a Protestant convert? Because only Protestant converts don't believe in the Immaculate Conception, right?
I hope I'm Orthodox, but we will see.
I'm being facetious.
Yeah, I know.
And so, based upon what you've seen in the debate, maybe what are your general comments, and where would you critique both sides?
Yeah, I think, Father, your point about her death was your strongest point. And at that point, I felt you won the debate, basically, because you can point at many different points how much you want, but if your overall picture doesn't hold, it's basically meaningless for me. So yeah, and he brought up the prophet Elijah, that he didn't die, and I hope we can speak more about that later. But yeah, that's...
believe me, I have it queued up, so don't you worry.
Yeah, okay. And that
that was a point that there was this bizarre, incorrect overemphasis, which we will get into in a little bit. But continue, John.
Yeah, I just want to say he talked about the fathers, but he actually didn't quote them. At one point, he quoted one from his memory, and so I would take caution there. I think people should go try to read it for themselves and make up their own mind, because as Father Patrick said during the debate, it's a question of interpretation, and yeah.
Well, many of these quotations were lacking citations to verify what was said. A lot of these things were admittedly offhand comments, likely taken out of context. We're going to base this upon interviews we've seen on Reason and Theology. Who's that Syriac expert? Dr. Sebastian Brock, that like, oh, well, he said this offhand comment. I've seen the comments he made that actually are inconsistent with what they say, but they'll say, no, he agreed with me. And it's a logical fallacy because that's an appeal to authority. And two, it's not even they're not even employing the logical fallacy in an honest way, which is problematic. It's a little too fast and loose, even for the debate context. I think there should always be citations, especially when someone is repeatedly shown to be misusing text. I think they need that because nothing they could say once they've been caught doing it even once could be taken to be credible. So before I give my synopsis, let me bring the microphone back to Father Patrick here. And do you have any follow-up comments, any closing, opening comments on your feelings about the debate, maybe the YouTube comment you were reading?
All right. Yes. Well, yeah, the sense of feeling of it is that, as John said, I think that the actual the core of my argument was about the death of a mother of God, and that only if she died, then she must have inherited it from Adam, and he didn't get close to doing anything. He sort of spoke around it, threw out these the holy death and things like this, but he didn't get to the point. The Elijah thing was, we went on for a bit, but I don't know why he was trying to press that so much. I thought after I could have answered that probably a little bit better. I did a little bit later on address that a bit better. But it's interesting looking at other comments. There is a misconception that my position, and actually another very important idea is expresses as a concept of being bound to death. Which is distinct from just dying, and I think people don't quite grasp the distinction between those 2 points. So, in other words, Christ dying temporarily without corruption was actually not a sin in itself. That is not a bad thing. It was just like going to sleep for a little while, as long as he doesn't get corrupt. So, actually, inheriting death in itself and going through a process of dying is not a sinful or bad or unholy thing. It doesn't divide you from God in itself as a momentary thing. Just like the whole universe being created doesn't deny God and his momentary emptying of himself and becoming man. It was allowed as long as it's a sort of a one-off event. Well,
again, what's lacking even in that explanation in this debate, and I've noticed most people talking about this issue, this is an extremely important doctrine. It's in the sentence of the Sixth Ecumenical Council. It's called Economic Conversation. Christ voluntarily assumed the blameless passions, corruptibility, and death. He was sinless. He was under no compulsion to die. The fathers, and I say, the fathers, we got videos where I quote them. The fathers are very clear on this. We could give examples if people want them, but I just want to make that as a point. It's in the sentence. You could look it up in the sentence of the Sixth Ecumenical Council. It's open source. And so the real question for the Roman Catholic side is, being that the Theotokos voluntarily died, is this some sort of ability that she had according, you could say, according to grace due to her conception, or according to grace at some other point of her life? What do the fathers say? The whole debate hinges upon this. The whole, how did the Theotokos voluntarily die? But I interrupted there. Is there any other comments before I give my general overview of this debate?
Yeah, well, and the other ones is I did feel like I was one time I felt that William was just speaking a bit too much, and actually one of the things I noticed a lot of politicians do is they repeat the same thing regardless of whether or not it's actually addressing the question at hand. So they're not actually addressing the specific question, they just repeat the same phrase over, and then I get very annoyed when watching politics on TV, even the British Parliament, when they come out and do the same thing. It's just like, could you actually just answer the question, please? I want to know the answer. So that was, and another comment picked up that there was a lot of talking and nice words, etc., but the actual substance I didn't find convincing.
Yes, very much presentation and a lack of substance.
Well, it's some substance. It wasn't totally lacking, but
I'd have a debate with you on that.
it was nevertheless it wasn't directed specifically at the critique, and yes, he wasn't ready for that critique either. So in some ways, though I could have been better dealing with the sort of the patristic material and firing counter quotes, at the same time, when it comes to actually dealing with things in a theological manner, as was in the ecclesiological manner of the other debate, I wasn't getting a response that was actually dealing with the theology of the matter or the ecclesiology of the matter at a level where it is actually dealing with things that more than just sort of the popular level or advanced popular level. They're not sort of untrained and uneducated people. It's a sort of a level where before you get into sort of serious theology.
Now, on that note, do you have the YouTube comment handy that we were reading when we were off air?
Yes, if you want me to read it out for you.
Yeah, please, Father.
I just have to find it again. Sorry, I just have to go through all these comments.
Hey, John, we got to fill out this dead air somehow.
Dead air. Here we go. Well,
there we go.
Here we go. I really don't think William did anything to refute the points the father made. He talked a lot, but never really hammered the point of contention.
There you go. It's the overall argument was ignored. It was all style, and there was substance, but if you mean by substance things that are factual, as in actually quoting the father correctly, actually explaining what he said, there was no substance. And so here's my overall analysis, Father, and I don't make friends by flattering people like some other people out there, so please forgive me. But I believe, and I'm going to make this very clear from the offset, if the point was to win, William Albrecht won the debate. That is my view. It's the normal schmuck, and no offense, all you viewers out there, but I think most of you guys are schmucks. You haven't read this stuff close enough. To the normal schmuck, it sounds like he had more fathers. He was more assertive. He wasn't on the back foot. That must mean he won. And so that's what people walked away feeling would be my analysis of the situation. Now, I think that Albrecht was very fast and loose. In fact, even patently inaccurate with details. We'll go over some of those. And I just think that because he was hammering so specific on details, probably the best way to respond would have been to just pick one of those that you would have had knowledge of and focused on it. Because he was, for example, saying, well, you said this in an interview on Reason Theology and holding you to it and saying, well, now you're being inconsistent. And quite frankly, it's almost as if you're saying you were wrong and now you're being deceptive, which I felt really was not very becoming of the, you know, of yourself, your position as a clergyman. But again, he's done worse than that in the past. So I'm not going to like say this is the most horrific thing that's happened in human history. But let me ask you this question, and it's going to be a simple one. We talked about a little off air. But have you read this book, which is Daly's translation of the Dormition homilies? Because most of the debate would have been in this book.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet. And it's a good book. God willing, Father, you get around to it. How about you, John? You own this book, even though you're Greek. Buying books in English. You read this book yet? You just own a good paperweight.
Reading things in ancient Greek is not always so easy. Yeah.
So did he get to read any of this book yet or no?
Not the whole, but not much. But I have read some parts of it. Yeah.
And so, what is your general impression of just this genre of Dormition homily? What's it like? What is it like to read it?
Yeah, my interest in reading them was first historically to actually see what people said back then and so on, and what I lost my train of thought now.
So what was it like reading those books, that whole genre of literature?
Yeah, as I said, I have not read all of them, so I don't, or even most, so I don't want to say something generally about that. But I think, I don't know if this, maybe Father can correct me or if this is true, but it's interesting that these kind of sermons pop into existence, or let's say, or in the time frame that they are, because Protestants would say that, yeah, it's very late in history. But I think that when the church kind of finished dogmatizing about Christ and the Trinity, then it was appropriate in a sense to also ask the question, what's the Virgin's role in this? I think it happens earlier, but I'm saying that in the history of dogmatic theology and systematic theology, it makes kind of sense, because one difference that I think kind of shown in the debate also is that we don't have Mariology. We use the word sometimes, but we have like Theotokology. We are always speaking about the Virgin in relationship to Christ. But some Orthodox critique have been of the Catholic position that they're speaking about Mary not connected with Christ. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And maybe that's a difference between our position. Maybe Father can correct me here, but why we don't ask the question about the Immaculate Conception as they do in the Catholic tradition. But yeah, I have not read all I don't want to give a politician's answer, so I just refrain for
it doesn't stop other people from making things up. Well, what do you have to say about that, Father?
Well, no, his general observations, I think, are what people talk about, how accurate they are. And again, when you make these observations, are very generalistic. Realities is a huge variety of opinions and ideas in Roman Catholic circles and Protestant circles. So it's very hard to say how each one or any particular one deals with the Mother of God and their way of speaking about it. I definitely think the whole Immaculate Conception thing is a product of the development of medieval scholastic thinking. Not that the scholastic or serious thinking is a problem, but what they've started thinking about, the ways they started thinking about sin and death and anthropology and all these, how these things work, our relationship with God. And so it's because of that context that the issue even becomes something to define or to say, because they ended up creating their own problem that they needed to solve. And that's why they had to create this, put this doctrine forward, or got moved towards doing that. And so it just never rose in the East, because the basis of the anthropology, the ecclesiology, etc., at the back was never there. So it was just a completely different thing. So it just never came.
So I'm gonna play a quick clip from the debate. I think quick anyway. I just want to say also, I do think that Matt Fradd did a fair job moderating it. I think there are times where he kind of broke things up. The questions he asked from the audience, understandably, he picked the people giving you money, the super chat people, but they appear to me to be fair questions. But I just think in general, when you're debating a Roman Catholic doctrine, almost everything's going to revolve around the Roman Catholic doctrine. Now imagine if the debate was that Theotokos voluntarily died because she attained to theosis. Right now, all of a sudden, all the questions are going to be Orthodox oriented, and the whole Roman Catholic paradigm doesn't really quite make a lot of sense. So it's, in a sense, when you're arguing this distinct Roman Catholic view divorced from Orthodoxy, it kind of forces you off your playing field onto their playing field. And now you're having debates about Roman Catholic doctrinal distinctions and not Orthodox ones. And so that's something that I've noticed. But let me make the screen bigger. Here we are. And let me play a little bit. Hopefully it's queued up where I want it. This should be about Enoch and Elijah. 1 second.
40 seconds here. We have to emphasize, we saw it earlier, as much as people like to believe it, and I know people like their traditions a lot, physical death is not universal. We saw that earlier. There were no patristics, and there was nothing biblical for Enoch and Elijah. We've got to stick to what the Bible and the church fathers do say.
All right, and so I'm going to stop there for just a moment. And for those who watch the debate, this is the second time the issue came up, which is allegedly Enoch and Elijah were not the two prophets in the book of Revelation, despite the fact they called down fire, and there's all these obvious Old Testament allusions to the fact that the two men that were gathered up to heaven and never died and then were brought back were Elijah and Enoch. And so for some reason, I can only say it's bizarre, William Albrecht was emphatic. Well, could you name an early, if you remember, an early father who taught this, not some later tradition, but an early father? And he said, well, like you said, Father Patrick, I can't remember him on top of my head. It's like, well, doesn't that concern you? He responded, that you can't think of an early father. This was an early idea in the church. And then he doubled down on this. And here's what's so bizarre about it. I'm going to share a screen. Tons of early fathers taught this. Tons of early fathers. It starts with St. Hippolytus in his book on the prophet, the book of Daniel. His commentary in the book of Daniel. So that's one of the earliest fathers there are that we have extant sources gave this interpretation. But I'm going to share something really easy for the audience because it's on Aquinas Study Bible, which is a real good resource. Aquinas Study Bible, and you could find the following. I'm sharing screen, and it's in Thomas Aquinas Catena. I believe it's the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. And there's an editor's note in it. And it says, editor's note. Could everyone see this here? I think so. I'm not this computer expert, right? We see that good old editor's note in big words. That Enoch and especially Elias will come at the end of the world and by their preaching convert the Jews, as affirmed by Tertullian, Origen, Hilary, Chrysostom, Augustine, Pope St. Gregory, the Damascene, etc., etc. It's in my own reading. I found this also in, like I said, St. Hippolytus. It's in St. Andrew of Caesarea, and it's also in Venerable Bede. All when they talk about this part of the book of Revelation. So what is so bizarre is the thing that William Albrecht was emphatic that you should be concerned that no early father taught that the two prophets, because it only says two prophets, aren't Enoch, Elijah, and no father agrees with you, despite your tradition, he said. So emphatic that this is some sort of smoking gun, and he's patently wrong. There's an early consensus from the early 3rd century that continues for centuries afterwards. Like we just named something like 7 saints and 2 important writers, additional important writers, Tertullian and Origen. This was clearly a widespread universal teaching, which is why it's not coincidental, Father Patrick, that you said, well, of course, these 2 prophets were Enoch and Elijah. That's what everyone believes. In fact, there's only one saint who disputed this, and that's Saint Victorinus of Patau. And Saint Victorinus of Patau, in disputing it, he doesn't endorse it, he doesn't dispute it. He says, most people believe this. He essentially says, but we just don't know. Right? So we have one saint that says, you know, most people believe this, I'm not convinced, and the rest would just say, yes, this is what it is. So it's the exact opposite of what William Albrecht was saying. Now, Father, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, actually, that quite reminded me of something else I was wanting to say earlier. Was confusion. Is that being bound by death means universal death, and that's not the argument I was making. It's not that everybody has to die. The argument that he made is that when you inherit death as a human being of yourself, you can't undo that. We can't free ourselves from death of ourselves. So we are bound to death as a creature. Only God can rescue it. That doesn't mean that everyone has to die. God can rescue anyone at any stage, but he has to be justified in doing that. And the only justification is Christ's death and resurrection, which justifies everything prior. So prior, he could take a couple and translate, and they didn't necessarily have to die on the promise of Christ. But because the promise of Christ has not yet come, it wasn't something he could do in a general way, because he wasn't, you know, there's the sense of justice, the sense of truth, and the sense of freedom of the Mother of God to on her part. And so, but it is interesting also that when he said that, well, actually, I'm going to come back and die. So it doesn't. The only people that we actually can talk about are the final resurrection, where people are translated and they don't necessarily die. And so. Yes, but it doesn't matter if there's universal death. My position, the position is that there's a human being as a is going to and being in a state bound, they can't undo themselves. God can't be united to them just of himself.
On a more basic level, Father, the real issue is while you're discussing these theoretical matters, William Albrecht is pretty much sniping with all these fathers say this, fathers don't say that, scriptures say this, scriptures don't say that. And if you just took one thing and analyzed it, and I'm saying you in the second person, not you specifically, Father, if the intercluder would just take one thing and analyze it, and it's just so patently wrong, what else does he have that's patently wrong? Right? That's the part that really concerns me, especially when you're not going to cite your sources. Is why be so emphatic about something that you're not absolutely sure of, right? Someone with humility would be like, well, I'm not aware of any fathers that teach this, so why do you feel strongly about this? But instead, it's emphatic. It's used as a point to make it look like you, Father Patrick, don't know what you're talking about. And for most of the audience, they don't look into this stuff, but this stuff's in plain sight. Like what I just showed you guys is a basic commentary source from Thomas Aquinas, and then we have the editor's notes, which I'm sure weren't written by him, by the translator. So the point is, this stuff is not esoteric, and William Albrecht is so fast and loose with details that there's 2 kinds of people out there. People that don't know that, and they just think he knows a lot of stuff, and they're drawn in by the style, and then everyone else who just disregards everything he says, because almost everything looked at in any sort of detail is found to be blatantly wrong, just like this detail. Now, I want to quibble one thing with you, Father, which is when we talk about the issue of death, there's something you don't recognize that William Albrecht is presuming upon and his audience is presuming upon. All right. Now, I heard the quotation said that it's not a rule that all under original sin die. And you said that death is not. He said that death is not universal for original sin. We must admit there is an exception. And so this idea is if there's exceptions for people who don't die, then that must mean, logically speaking, this is the Roman Catholic argument, that original sin does not equal death. And there's something wrong with this logic. It's called that the premises are incorrect. There's 2 things that are incorrect. As you pointed out, Father, those who didn't die, those exceptions, tradition teaches will die. right? Like Enoch and Elijah. Tradition does teach they are going to die. They're going to be martyred. In fact, if we read the Dormition homilies, I believe this is actually in one of the unascribed Dormition homilies. You read this in Schumacher's book. But it actually explains to the Theotokos that she must die because there's no human being who won't taste death. And Christ says, even I taste death because I willfully lay down my life. So this now brings me to the second point, which is those who are fallen die because this is something that's the result of the fall, that because of the sin of Adam and Eve, blameless and blameworthy passions have entered to human existence. And due to these, corruption now enters in human existence. When the soul falls, the body falls with it. They're connected. We have Saint Cyril and other saints that speak about this. We have a whole episode where I give quotations from the fathers and Damascene on original sin. That's why I've done 2 hours on original sin, so people have access to that information. Now, that being said, we have examples in the hagiographies of not just the Theotokos, but Saint Stephen the Proto-Martyr, Saint Pelagia, Saint Sophia, all sorts of saints voluntarily lay down their lives and not just get they give up their soul before the axe chops off their head or whatever. It's particularly common with virginal saints, virginal female saints. It's very, very common. Now, why is this important? How is this possible? This is the difference between us and Roman Catholics. The answer to the how is because by grace, when we cooperate with the grace of God and attain to theosis, now we are God. We could do what God did, which is he could voluntarily lay down his life. So it's not something people could just do. It's something that they acquire through theosis. And I broke up a little bit there. And so the Roman Catholics, while we have this consistent answer, we have a conciliar statement. We're getting too popular. We're breaking up. The Roman Catholics are actually inconsistent with whether death's a result of original sin. Why? Because there are Roman Catholics that are Mariological prelapsarianists, which include Father Christian Copts, that teach that because, again, it's the Orthodox doctrine, all of sin die. And so the Theotokos never died. That's what Father Christian Copts believed, and this was the belief of Father Martin Yugi, Anton Wegner, and guys like that, because they were aware, your argument, Father Patrick, that those who die have original sin, so Mary never died. Now, however, there is a view among scholasticism that started during medieval times that the body could die because of original sin, but not the soul. The soul could be free of original sin, but not the body. And so when William Albrecht affirms the death of Theotokos, but she had no original sin, he's taking not even Father Christian Copts' view, he's taking a Latin scholastic view of original sin. And so for all this talk that the Roman Catholics have a pope and they could settle the important stuff, they actually don't have original sin settled. A very basic point, right? I just gave two totally divergent opinions that is not dogmatically discerned within the tradition of Roman Catholicism. While the Orthodox view, we have a decree that's dogmatically binding that settles this issue and also addresses how it applies to the Theotokos. It's Decree 6, the Council of Jerusalem, 1672. And so the whole storyline, the Orthodox, they haven't clarified their doctrines. They're just this mess, this potpourri of stuff from years ago, because ever since they lost the Pope, they couldn't clarify matters anymore, is the exact opposite in the case of original sin and in Theotokology, as John was talking about, as compared to the Roman Catholics, who really, their only true doctrine is the papacy. All they know is the Pope says the Immaculate Conception is real, so now it has to be real somehow. They don't know how. The how, they don't have the answer to. They have two hows. We have one how. We know exactly how it worked. And so having made that comment, I want to give you, Father Patrick, an opportunity to perhaps respond, maybe disagree if you like to, and John will give you an opportunity to make some comments.
let John go first while I get my head around it.
Good old John, how about you?
Yeah, I was thinking of what you said before about Elijah, and it's that part of the discussion surprised me because on top of my head I remembered Christ speaking about Elijah, and Elijah seems to be, a very important person. People even confused, thought Christ was calling upon Elijah on the cross, and so I knew it's something strange here, that his argument that this is a late development. So I looked, and if you go, for example, to the Old Testament, even Malachi 4, chapter 4, verse 5, it says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." So there you have it. It's in the Bible. And if you go to the book of Sirach, it's speaking about it too. And if you go to Mark and to Matthew, they ask Christ. They
Wait,
say,
John, I thought Orthodox weren't spiritual people. They don't read the Bible.
yeah.
That's what William Albrecht said. You were saying he's wrong about that too?
Yeah, I think he's wrong about that. So
Best not to make comments like this if you don't want to be criticized for them. So, all right, continue.
Yeah. So, for example, in Mark chapter 9, verse 11, they ask Christ, and they asked him, saying, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" So this is a topic that is discussed and is debated at the time. And Christ says that indeed Elijah is coming first and restores all things. And how is it written concerning the Son of Man, that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has also come, and they did to him whatever they wished, as it is written of him. And in Matthew's version, it clearly states it's John the Baptist. So he says here that there will come one person in the spirit of Elijah, let's say, that will prepare the first coming of the Lord, John the Baptist, but he will also come at the end as, and if you read the Old Testament quotation, it's clear it's the end, because it speaks about the last day. It's I can make many points here. It's interesting. I can read, if you want, from the book of Sirach. It says that he's
Go right
speaking,
ahead.
from chapter 28. He starts speaking a lot about Elijah. Then he says, "At the appointed time, it is written, you are destined to calm the wrath of God before it breaks out in fury, to turn the hearts of the parents to the children, and to restore the tribes of Jacob." So I want to, but I looked at different.
And that's obviously the mass conversion of the Jews at the end time.
Yeah, or the tribes of Jacob. Maybe it stands for the whole world in some sense. I don't know. But the interesting part here is that he used the word restore, and Christ used also the word restore, apokatastasi. Elijah will come and he will apokatastisi. In Sirach it says
The
just
restitution of all things.
Yeah, katastisi. So it's the same word. And this is another point maybe we can make, that Christ here is actually quoting the book of Sirach and not the book of Malachi, because it seems to fit with this word. But yeah, so this thing that, and if you also look in Jewish sources, in the let's say in the Sanhedrin 39 or 19:8a, it speaks about Elijah's earthly return, and you can let's say you can look, if you have this, let's say, anointed Jewish New Testament, they mention this in that. So this is not something we are making up. This is something that is debated, that is there. So what happens then to this debate? What happens to his exception from his point of view, that a person must die? Well, it's it's gone basically. And the question now, he must deal with the question: why did the Virgin, the Theotokos, die?
Now, Father Patrick, you want to follow up, or you want to keep rolling for a little bit?
Oh no, it's right. Yeah, no, it's very good. It should have had you the tag teaming on the side of that particular point. Yeah, no, I just knew of it and just assumed that this sort of thing is correct. So I mean, I haven't gone and done a specific focus study on the particular matter to pull it out. It's sort of one of those sort of more obscure things which you don't always get time to look into. Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is with the voluntary death, that still requires that the body is on the way to die. So when Stephen's stoned, when Christ is crucified, when the Virgin Martyrs are giving up their souls, it is because either the body is going to die very soon, but you have a sort of a mastery of when you die, rather than the fact of creating a death that was never going to happen, because there's no causal death other than yourself leaving your body, which is actually suicide. So there is a difference when you give up your soul before the body head's actually chopped off, in anticipation of death, than there is to talking about giving up the soul when there is no causal death. There's no thing about dying, which is a different matter, which is a type of suicide. Now, Christ didn't commit suicide; he was on the cross going to die. He gave up his body when he decided, as master of death. He took death on himself voluntarily. In a sense, but he also was in the process of being killed, because he couldn't just go and commit suicide. That wasn't going to do it. He had to be in the process of dying. And same with Stephen. And so that I'm taking that to the mother of God is that you can't use the argument of it voluntarily, holy death, etc., without her actually having been having death caused in some way other than her choice. So she gave the time, she controlled when and how, she was like master of it. But at the same time, it was still something that she was going to suffer for some reason. And obviously it wasn't for martyrdom or accident or anything like that. So the only causal fact was inherited death from Adam.
Now, on that note, I want to quote William Albrecht, because he asked you this. He said, which one of these fathers said Mary died because of original sin? Right? Because you're speaking the general principle, and his response to you was, which one of these fathers said Mary died because of original sin? And he faulted you. He explicitly said, and you didn't bring up any fathers. All right? And so I think that this is something that needs to be corrected. So, for example, to give just a general overview, the Dormition homilies speak of two things about the Theotokos death. She had to die because of Adam, 1, and 2, she voluntarily died. We affirm both are true. Again, the question is how, right? The how is the difference between the Orthodox view and the Roman Catholic view. Now, the Damascene, for example, I'm going to quote him, says, behold the Virgin, daughter of Adam and mother of God, because of Adam, she commits her body to the earth. And so we have, for example, a quotation right there that explicitly says, because of Adam, that's why she dies. Right? This is not a matter of debate. And we could get into other fathers that talk about this issue. But to me, this is what's lacking debate. You just show one example where it's wrong, then what else is wrong? It's like the Elijah and the Moses issue. And so I just wanted to point that out. I think that he rattled you a little bit with that because, like you said, he didn't read the book on the Dormition homilies. You were speaking about general Orthodox doctrine, not the specifics. And I don't think you expected the audacity that he would, so I want to be as nice as possible in saying this, so forgive me, that he would have the audacity to get details so incorrect and be so emphatic about it, right? Usually you're only that emphatic about something because you're absolutely sure you're right? That you're not going to be embarrassed and someone's going to pick out something you're wrong. But apparently there isn't that sense of, lack of a better term, shame, at least not in the debate presentation. I cannot comment on anything else in the rest of his life or whatever. I'm commenting on this debate. And I think this led to you, Father, saying an incorrect statement, because then you followed up with that by saying that Mary did not die due to a lack of grace. And this would actually contradict something you even said during the show, because I know you didn't mean it this way, which is the moment sin entered the world, right? You get sin cuts us off from God's grace, and that's what leads to the passions and corruptibility and death, right? So the fact that Mary died shows that there's a sense where she was not given grace as a default in an impassible state. She did not have tentative immortality like Adam and Eve did. But I do want to make clear, because this is the explicit teaching of St. Gregory Palamas, and he's not a saint. I'm forgetting his name at the top of my head. But there's a Dormition homily in the 11th century. It's translated into French by Wegener. I can't remember his name for the moment. But there's Byzantine writers that are explicit that the Theotokos was able to voluntarily die because she became, through grace, was able to attain to theosis after the Annunciation. And so, as you were just alluding to, though, they could grow old, frail, and die, by grace, they have this ability to partake in the Christological reality of laying down their own life on their own terms. And so this is something that is a matter of grace. And so because this word grace is being used very fast and loose, I just wanted to clarify that. Now, Father, if you want to clarify any matters, take issue with what I just said, let me give you an opportunity to respond. And then, John, if you have any other comments on that, you could respond, and then we'll move on to the next point.
Yeah, no, you're right. I don't think I was incorrect when I was talking about the grace. So I can see the point you're trying to raise about the inconsistency of it, because I was talking in the latter part of what you said of obviously theosis is full of grace. So that the sense being that despite the fact that yes, she. Initially, yes, there's a union with God. Without the separation from God, things die. She obviously, that separation was fixed with her at some point, probably very early on it. But she nevertheless inherited death. And just like when we were all baptized, and we're in the state where exactly what she's meant to be at the Immaculate Conception, through Roman Catholic doctrine, at our baptism, we still end up dying. So at that point, the inheritance of death for all human beings, apart from Christ, is so ubiquitous. Everybody does, and still dies, even if you're born again in the water. That there's a sort of a sense of, though it's initially we die because of the lack of grace, that still stays with us, even if we're full of the Holy Spirit and things like that. So that the punishment, in a sense, carried out. No matter of fact, when the baptism, we actually die and are born again, even, but the body still carries that curse, for want of a better word, for God's providence and dispensation, etc. And so I think there's a slight the different angle what we're speaking about when we're talking on this, as the moment of the fall and what man does, and in how God works things post that.
All right, John, do you have any follow-up comments?
No, not at this point.
See,
Sorry.
now I have to go to the next point while I'm in the middle of just pulling up stuff on my screen, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Now, it's okay. So William Albrecht says that Mary never has that stain, and he's saying, he's quoting something from St. Ephraim the Syrian. He never provides a citation, but he doesn't fail to say how he reached out to the top Syriac scholar in the world on this issue, and it's just pretty bizarre because St. Ephrem the Syrian was very clear that the Theotokos was cleansed of original sin by baptism at the Annunciation. Now, Dr. Kathleen McVeigh, who translated the majority of Ephrem the Syrian's hymns in a 1988 book, and if it's not the majority, I have the proportion wrong, I apologize. She says, despite Ephrem's emphasis on Mary's role as the second Eve, here he makes it clear, and we're going to read hymn 16 where she makes this note, that she is redeemed along with all the humankind by Christ, and that's on page 150. So what is that comment specifically about? Now, this is in hymn 16, just want to bring it up. Jesus is baptized. Jesus is baptized and redeemed Mary. St. Ephrem the Syrian wrote, shall I call you Lord, O you who brought forth his mother in another birth out of the water? Again, I am mother because of your conception, and bride am I, now this is Mary being quoted, because of your chastity, handmaid and daughter of blood and water am I, whom you redeemed and baptized. Son of the Most High, who came and dwelt in me, in another birth he bore me also, in a second birth I put on the glory of him. So clearly this is talking about the Annunciation. This is what the translator McVeigh recognizes. We also have the Nativity hymn in the that's actually a different hymn, my apologies. In the Nativity hymn, the first one, this is in verse 14, it says man, or literally Adam in the Aramaic or Syriac, if you look at footnote 15 in the translation from McVeigh, Adam opposed corruption on woman when she came forth from him. Today she has repaid him, she who has borne the Savior. Right? So Adam imposed corruption, and in a sense, Mary outdoes Eve by giving birth to the Savior. So again, it links the birth to the end of original sin. Now, I think chronologically, because this is poetic, between conception and birth is obviously 9 months. But what does a Syriac expert that studied with Dr. Sebastian Brock say? And I can't pronounce his name. He was interviewed on this show. Father Puthu Pomerambo, can't pronounce it, but he was that Indian scholar we had on. He's a Roman Catholic monk. So I'm not pulling some Protestant or liberal or something that effect. But he made specific, he said, Mary's exclusion from original sin is not plausible. There's no ambiguity in the Syriac text in this respect. And he says Mary's purification was necessary for the Son of God to assume a body without sin, as the descent of the Holy Spirit upon Mary was. And now he quotes Jacob of Sarug, another person that William Albrecht was mentioning, and he is a Syriac writer very similar to Ephrem the Syrian, to let loose from her the former sentence of Eve and Adam. Right? So the descent of the Holy Spirit upon Mary in the Annunciation, the quote, Ephrem the Syrian, not Ephrem the Syrian, but Jacob of Sarug, let loose from her the former sentence of Eve and Adam. So this idea that there's nowhere in the fathers, that's a Roman Catholic saint, not an Eastern Orthodox saint, by the way, but nowhere in their fathers even where they would teach against, teach the idea that the Theotokos had original sin or didn't die because of original sin is patently untrue. So it seems to me when people say, well, there's the Syriac expert and the Syrians know something we don't. It's this kind of exotic Asiatic way of talking about something that, you know, the wisdom's in the East, so to say, you know, east of us, right? Wisdom's east of Greece. Sorry, John. But when you actually get into the details, again, details, he's wrong. And this is why I'll never have a debate with William Albrecht, because the whole debate would be me calling to question his details and his method of debating. You couldn't have a real debate with the individual. Because I think fast and loose with details would actually be too kind of a way to put how he's treating these things. And so I have all sorts of articles with all sorts of quotes from fathers, and there's more. I won't take more time in it. Let me give John an opportunity to respond if he likes to, and then I will give it to Father Patrick.
Is it anything in particular you want me to address? Or
anything you want, whatever your heart desires.
Well, I think for William, I think his position was more difficult, say, than one person that says that he believes that Mary was assumed to heaven without the death. So I don't know. Yeah, that's one thing that I thought about also during the debate, that his position is even more difficult to defend theologically because of that point. And yeah.
All right, so you're the theory guys. I'm the detail guy. What say you, Father Patrick?
Yeah, well, I just same thing. I mentioned right at the last closing statement that if you're going to do it, the only thing is she's translated alive. So this is why Roman Catholics have to have these guys talking about it who've been assumed alive. And as soon as he's willing to admit that she's died, then he's put himself in almost an impossible position. Because the ultimate, I didn't press him further on this point, but just ultimately, the only way it's a voluntary death without it being with some form of death inherited that's going to happen is actually suicide, and that would be a contradictory to life. She'd be deliberately ending life, which is contrary to her life, being the mother of life, to being to God. So the only thing is that death has to be somehow about to be imposed or something in the future. So yeah, I agree with John that really makes his position almost impossible. It makes the general Roman Catholic position, I think, impossible on this. And yes, as all the fathers, thank you for all the detailed quotes on these points. Is that they don't actually say as he was claiming to say. But that's what I said. Look, I could sit down and we have a discussion for 16 hours going through all these proof texts on these points if you want to, but it's not. It will take us 16 hours to go through. And I said, look, I could.
I want to ask a sincere question, which would be, why would a Roman Catholic be happy to see that their position is defended with such methods? It would seem to call into question the integrity of your worldview, right? The side that has the truth doesn't have to resort to theatrics, doesn't have to resort to things that are inaccurate and things that we're seeing here. And so I think there's a place for a proper delivery and being measured how you talk and even strategy, but it can't go to the point where there's no substance or a complete disregard for substance, which is what I think we're seeing here. Now, speaking of details, for some reason, this debate several times, there was this peculiar emphasis on Theotokos of Livos. He wrote in the early 6th century, early 7th century, or late 5th century. And William Albrecht, and I can't remember if this is actually in the book, by the way, but I'll just take his word for it for now because he didn't give a citation. And he said, Theotokos said, she who is in a clear and spotless place. And that sounds like Immaculate Conception, right? Like, without me saying that in a certain way, it doesn't, where's the Immaculate Conception at? But being that he's not a saint, it'd be like, well, why would we, who cares about Theotokos? It would have been the first time everyone there heard about this individual. It's pretty bizarre. Now, I personally think Theotokos is pretty interesting because he's writing kind of close to the geography of Jacob of Sarug and St. Ephrem the Syrian. And so some of the Mariological statements he makes is very similar, this parallel. So if you're like really into the genre, he's an interesting outlier. But again, he's not a saint, so it's like, why would we hinge our argument on Theotokos? But it doesn't even help him. What does Theotokos really say? And this is in the first chapter. He says that for if he has blessed his saints with the whole kingdom of heaven, if he opened paradise to a thief with a single word, how much more would he have been eager to welcome the one who made him a home in her womb, the one whom he had created, whom he had formed, from whom he became flesh as he willed. His purpose was that the power of the prince of evil should be destroyed through her by whom he had deceived us. And through her, all women should find freedom from the curse that bound them, for she shall be saved through childbearing, as the apostle says. And he's quoting, of course, 1 Timothy 2:15. Now, before I read the next quote, I'm going to give it an interpretation, then I'm going to show you why the interpretation is right. The reason why women are saved through childbirth, because in a sense, Christian women are following the footsteps of the second Eve, who was also saved through childbirth, because through the conceiving of Jesus Christ by the Holy Spirit, she was baptized spiritually and was freed from the bondage of original sin like we are in our baptism. Now, someone say, well, I think that interpretation is stretching it too much, though I don't think it is, but let's just go later, chapter 7 in Theotokos of Livius. And he says this about Mary. She has found what Eve had lost. She has found what Adam was deprived of because of his disobedience. She has entered saying, breathe on my garden. That's from Song of Songs 4:10. God, the Word, has entered, has dwelt in her, and paradise is opened. The advocate has entered, that's the Holy Spirit, and welcomes the thief. Amen, I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise. And so we see again, Mary finds what Eve and Adam lost when she permits the Holy Spirit to conceive Christ in her, right? This is a little clearer than the first passage, but this is Theotokos plain. There's the context to prove it. This one-off sentence that she who is clear and spotless place, that doesn't necessarily equal Immaculate Conception as per the 1854 definition. As you said, Father Patrick, I can affirm she's she's spotless. I can affirm she's immaculate. We don't reject this. What we reject is your rationale of what this entails. And that seems to be, I think your point was very straightforward, but I think people almost didn't hear it through all the theatrics. So that's my comments on the good old Theotokos. Father Patrick, do you have any comments on that?
Just on the point of I brought up in the debate, and there's a couple of points that, again, you see just a difference of Roman Catholic and Orthodox thinking, is that Christ was always going to need to be incarnate. He was always going to have come through a virgin mother as such, and so fundamentally, for every woman, in a sense, unless you're committed to the ascetic life, childbearing is what was the path to salvation of humanity. So, and it's in a sense, giving birth to children, the freedom that Mother of God, never even being a virgin, accepted giving birth to a child, though she was dedicated to be a virgin her entire life. This is the meaning of I do not know a man. It's not that she was ignorant, I'm going to get married. The statement was she was never expecting to ever have a sexual relationship with a man. She nevertheless accepted to be a mother, and that's what saves us, and she had to accept that. And so, that's why for any woman to reject childbirth or to step away from raising of children would be a denial of our salvation as being what was, because they would justify Mary saying no, it would have destroyed our entire salvation. So there's a whole deep theological meaning for a woman and her place and the role in the whole system of the essential part of a woman for the salvation of humanity, in the fact that she needed to give birth to the child, and so childbearing is such an important part. But in the Christian sense, of course, there is a perfectly good role of being, and that's why in the Old Testament as well, it was such a curse to not give children. Obviously, in the New Testament now, part of virginity, Mother God opens up both paths. You can either take the path of motherhood or the path of virginity. But yeah, there certainly is a strong case against denying children for any reason of jobs, careers, or putting anything else before there. Either you are married and have children, or you're probably a virgin and following that path. So, but there's a real deep theological and salvific meaning to this, and that's why you're saved through childbirth, sort of thing. I think it's really quite powerful what Mother of God does through that. And it's interesting that, again, for baptism, we talk is a union with Christ. It's becoming one body with Christ. And, of course, the Mother of God does that through the conception, that God, his body is united to her body. He takes his body from her body. So they become one flesh at that stage. And so that is the equivalent of baptism, where you are united and with the body of Christ. And so, yeah, so that's an amazing point. But again, that's the other thing is the important part of her freedom, which is undoing Eve's thing. And I did mention this in the debate, is actually the thing is that she needs to start from a point of inheriting death. And then in her freedom of accepting life in obedience, that undoes Eve and brings her to be the mother of life rather than the mother of death. It's a beautiful undoing parallel, which would make no sense if she was already in the state of Eve there. And also it sort of undermines a little bit that the death and the fall actually didn't get in the way of the whole Savitic process. Fundamentally, Christ was always going to have to be incarnate, etc. And to sort of have to make her like an Eve already prior to the, was sort of almost denying, saying that Christ didn't or couldn't die, or it wasn't appropriate for God to die, you know, even momentarily. So that sort of raises the question of the whole ability of Christ to be incarnate and be crucified for us. So yeah, that just throwing that out in there.
Now, John, what say you, if anything?
I was reading also some comments, and we Orthodox we confirm that she was spotless, that she was blameless, and I believe, and all the Orthodox I have talked to believe that she didn't commit any personal sin in that sense, like, you know, stealing or lying or whatever. She was perfect. But I have a book back in Sweden with all the titles that is given to the Virgin in the hymnograph of the church and so on. It's about, I didn't count, but it was hundreds and hundreds of titles. And I just want to say that the technical title sinless in Greek, anamartite, is not, I couldn't find it. I could not find it. So I just want to say, because sometimes people say she was sinless, but in the Greek, anamartite, I have not found it. And I would be pleased if someone can show me that in Greek. But that doesn't mean, I think it's just a technical in the sense that only Christ is sinless. So, but that doesn't mean she committed any personal sin. But that title seems to be reserved to God in some sense. But I don't know if you have some comment of that. Probably you both.
Well, the St. John of San Francisco says the same thing, and he's quoting the liturgies, St. John Chrysostom, that Christ is the only sinless one. That doesn't mean that Theotokos committed sin. There's a sense where Christ is exceptionally sinless in a different sense.
Yeah.
And so I actually had, in a debate with a Roman Catholic, they said, well, it says Panagia, that means all holy. How could there be sin? And I said, well, this kind of connects to my next point, which is a lot of Roman Catholics say we glorify the Theotokos more than the Orthodox, because what could be more glorious than her not having sin at all since conception, her entire earthly existence? Well, I could tell you it's her chief merit, which is, St. Gregory Palamas taught, is that she undid original sin through her holiness, that she had every disadvantage. She lived according to the law of human nature. I'm quoting the Father there. With all things we had to deal with, never had a passionate thought. She turned from every carnal desire. Again, these are quotes from the Fathers. And she attained to theosis and was able to undo death. And so if you say, well, she was just born that by default without the cooperation of her will, that she'd actually undo something that was a true defect, then you just took away the most amazing thing she did. Right? What is the difference between the Theotokos, the second Eve, and the first Eve? The first Eve was born immaculate, and then she's deceived into sin. The Theotokos was not born immaculate. Immaculate in the sense of original sin. She was born immaculately in as much as her Saints Joachim and Anna dispassionately conceived her. There is a difference, because we will use immaculate in that sense. But that she was not born immaculate in the Roman Catholic sense. She was born with original sin, but she had discernment instead of being deceived. You see the Fathers talk about this in her conversation with the Archangel Gabriel, that unlike Eve, who accepted what the angel said, they kind of say, well, no, Theotokos asked questions, right? She tried to discern the truth of the matter. So the Theotokos was adamant not to be deceived. The Theotokos, instead of Eve, who could have been immortal because all she had to do was by default was just do God's will. Well, the Theotokos wasn't immortal by default, but by always doing God's will, became immortal. And her body was then afterwards translated into heaven. And so the Immaculate Conception is so devious, and this is where I disagree, at least with the sense of the words he said, Father Patrick, whether there's something wrong with it. It is wrong as understood because it takes away the greatness of the Theotokos, and that's why we have councils that condemn it. We have one council that condemns the Immaculate Conception by name, uses the words Immaculate Conception. It's wrong. And it's in the late 1800s in Constantinople for those who want to look it up. So the point is, it is evil because it actually demotes the Theotokos. It turns her into someone she's not. To quote St. John of Damascus, we do not worship the Theotokos as God because we proclaim her death. That's a quote from St. John of Damascus. It's in the third Dormition homily. Sadly, I'm going to pull William Albrecht. I don't have the chapter in front of me. If people really want, I could type it down because I don't have fake quotes. So that being said, it's this whole Roman Catholic story arc that somehow they honored the Theotokos more than us is just simply not true. Now, I have one other follow-up comment I wanted to make, and then maybe we're going to take audience questions. So we can go all day. There's stuff where the Ethiopian Orthodox, and we had someone present Ethiopian Orthodox Mariology on this channel. It's pretty much identical to Eastern Orthodox Mariology, but they may have their own internal debates. So that came up. I found it interesting. But let me make this note, and it's on the issue of Albrecht harping upon that the Theotokos cannot be under the dominion of the devil. And it's sort of like, well, when did the Orthodox say she's under the dominion of the devil? Who's he arguing against? It's some sort of straw man, but the real issue then is, all right, well, we agree in principle that the Theotokos is not under the dominion of the devil, all right? If you're just going to say the words. But will you affirm, like we do, these sayings from the fathers? I'm going to quote St. Augustine now, all right? This is in Book 4, paragraph 122 of Against Julianus. St. Augustine says, we do not deliver Mary to the devil by the condition of her birth, but for this reason, because this very condition is resolved by the grace of rebirth. So I'm going to repeat. We do not deliver Mary to the devil by the condition of her birth, but for this reason, because this very condition is resolved by the grace of rebirth. So if you understand that, St. Augustine, again, talks about baptism and the Annunciation, this rebirth has to do with the Annunciation. That's why she's not under the dominion of the devil. Again, this is what the saint says. I'm not a saint. William Albrecht's not a saint. Father Patrick's not a saint. This is what the saint says. We have this from St. Gregory the Illuminator in his third homily on the Annunciation. A quote from the Archangel Gabriel to the Theotokos. He says, no longer shall the devil be against you, for where of old that adversary inflicted the wounds, there now in thy womb, first of all, does the physician apply the salve of deliverance. Where death came forth, there has life now prepared its entrance. So again, we see the Annunciation is now when the devil's no longer against Theotokos. And so the problem is this. The Roman Catholic, like William Albrecht, can say, well, then that must mean you believe that before the Annunciation is under the dominion of the devil. I don't feel comfortable saying that. I just say, will you affirm what that saint says? Will you affirm that this is not an issue because of the Annunciation? Because that's what's explicit in the saints. Honestly, that's what, in my opinion, the scriptures teach. In Luke 1:35 talks about the overshadowing of Mary, and in the Greek Septuagint, the overshadowing of the tabernacle is the same Greek word. So the cleansing of the tabernacle and the cleansing of Theotokos is something that's scriptural, and that this is what the fathers are saying. There's other typology you could get into the scriptures. William Albrecht made mention, for example, that the tabernacle is made of pure olive wood, but all of creation, according to Romans 8, is under God's condemnation. right? It's not that the piece of wood is like sinful and does bad things, but is it a fallen piece of wood? Well, actually, yes, it's chopped off a tree. It's not living anymore. It's only a result of the fall. And so we have this issue. If the type for the Theotokos is something that's been purified and made blameless, but it's from fallen matter, right? It's not sinful according to its will, right? It doesn't have a will. It's a tabernacle. Well, the Theotokos, right, according to her body, she was born with original sin, but it doesn't mean she sinned. There's an actual typological parallel that the Immaculate Conception destroys scripturally. And so these are things that are often ignored in these debates because we get caught up with, well, I'm going to frame the Orthodox doctrine as it just makes Mary a child of the devil, which is horrible and blasphemous. Why would he even conceive of such a thing if you're not a Protestant? Because they don't have a high Mariology. So that's my last comments on that. I will get into the issue of doctrinal development next. Do you guys have any follow-up comments? How about we go first with Father Patrick?
Yeah, there's a couple of points that I sort of building up to each time, and if I hopefully can remember off the top of my head. One is the seeking of the sinlessness and just distinguishing between the state of being a sinner as a human being in a sense that without the grace of God, we can, because of our limits, we are limited as human beings. We cannot be good, no matter how good we are, what all our intentions are. We simply haven't got the power, the strength, the ability to be infinitely good as God is good, and only God is good. We can't be good of ourselves, and so we're all, in a sense, sinners. But that's quite distinct from our good will, our good intentions. We can be sinless in our thoughts and our willingness, but our capacity for righteousness or for goodness is limited. So therefore, we fall short. That's what sin means. You're missing the mark. You're falling short of the goodness of God. So everyone is a sinner in that sense. And the Mother of God, in that sense, is also a human being, a creature. As a sinner. And so this is where the sinless one is really only opposed to God, because only God of himself has the capacity for goodness, all of himself. He has the complete capacity and power for goodness. He's the only one that's truly able to transcend any weakness to sin and be truly good. That's only God is good. So that's the first point on that, to touch up the couple things there. And the other one is very interesting when we talk about perfection. And Matt sort of talking about, I was talking about perfection. In one sense, she said, perfect, humans can only be so perfect. And I think this is one of the biggest problems with Roman Catholic thinking, is that they're trying to think about human being good of themselves. And I said, no, perfection is being God. That is the only thing. And this is where Orthodox theology is that if eternal salvation is only possible by being perfect as God is perfect, holy as God is holy. That is a real perfection beyond anything that's possible as a human being. It's no condition that you can give to us, because the only way you could give it to us is to turn us into God. And this is why the whole essence energies distinction becomes absolutely essential, because the only way we can exist eternally is by participating in the activities of God by his power and becoming our power. And freely we are participating in this. That's the only way to have eternal existence. At a metaphysical level, you just cannot have a sort of limit.
Yeah, metaphysical is complicated, Father.
It is, I know, but this is where it comes down to. If you're going to actually discuss these things, you've got to get into these levels, because otherwise we're just talking nonsense, really. And so let's talk about, and this is where the whole saints have merits. They get a pass level, and there's an abundance of merits you get off from the saints. Now, it's not to say that the idea of merits is wrong. It's the idea that there's a pass mark, that you've got the excess of merits, and therefore these can be given back in indulgences, etc. Nonsense. The only salvation, the only perfection to be saved is a perfection of God himself, which is theosis. It's a complete union of God and participating in his infinite powers as yours. That that is the only perfection. It's for all of us in the last day at the resurrection. So when we talk about even theosis now, to me, theosis really only complete in the last day at the resurrection. That's why we sort of all wait until the last resurrection, because we have to transcend time and space for that. But anyway, and this, in other words, for Orthodox, this is how we conceive the Mother of God today, in a sense, is in this position of participating. That's why we can say, save us, because she's sharing in the very activities of God. And this is why we honor saints so highly. God is in them. But we can call on her effectively as God, because in all activity sense, in Vosie's essence, she remains a creature, and we don't worship her because she's not. She's receptive of the activities. She's not God per se. Nevertheless, we can honor her, and she also is the true mother of humanity, and even more powerfully, she is a mother of God. And what's interesting about this is that, in a way, God has, in a sense, changed with Christ as a son of God. As his hypostasis was defined as a son of a father in the relationship to the Holy Spirit. In his incarnation, to remain son in both equally in his hypostasis as son in both human and divine natures, means that his motherhood as a man must also be the motherhood of his divinity, and she, in a sense, becomes truly the mother of God. And takes a sort of an everlasting new position with the Son. He's now has a mother as well as a father for his hypostasis. Well, that's an amazing thing, and this is why we honor her so highly. But we're actually honoring her much more highly than I think Roman Catholics do. The idea of
Definitely
is irrelevant. And, matter of fact, as you say, it undoes the glory of honor her, because her freedom and her willingness to obey God was so utterly pure and free that she could be there, and she saved us essentially by her action. So she's nothing. We're
well
not.
said. Well said, Father. Now, John, you have any follow-up comments before we played a video clip?
Not much. I think your father spoke rightly that we don't divide Christ. That's basically, we are not Nestorians. We don't say she's mother only of the human side, and maybe we can say that she's mother of God in his humanity, let's say.
Well, and I'll just make the passing comment that it's interesting whenever you start discerning these things. It's very common for Roman Catholics to start saying things that are heretical, that are Christologically or anthropologically, because the Immaculate Conception is just not a doctrine that's consistent, which is why they don't have a consistent doctrine of original sin. That's why they can't agree how Christ died. They can't agree how Adam and Eve died. It's not in the sense the patristics, only through scholastic categories of thought, which by the admittance of scholars and Roman Catholic Encyclopedia, that they were inconsistent with this later Roman Catholic view. And that's why they will ultimately get into the issue of doctrinal development. And I'm going to play a clip on that note. And so let's go.
Into our closing statements, I'll address this to you, William. I think it's fair to say that there has been doctrinal development on the doctrine of original sin. That is just to say that the Church, or at least the Catholic Church would explain it this way, has come to a deeper understanding of what has been revealed to us about original sin. So isn't it difficult, if not impossible, to look at the early Church Fathers and expect them to teach us that Mary was immaculately conceived in the way that Catholics understand it today, when their understanding of original sin was in some sense less than ours is today?
I got to be quite honest with you, Matt. I think that might be the best question that has been posed today. That's a fantastic one, because how on earth can we be saying, well, they're saying what we're saying about the Immaculate Conception, if they didn't have a full understanding of original sin? That is precisely why we hearken to Romanos the Melodist, We hearken to Andrew of Crete, Germanus of Constantinople, Theotokos, John of Damascene, because by the time we do get to that period, before them, we have fathers talking about her all holy creation. But by the time we get to the early 400s in Theotokos, then to Romanos in the 500s, then to Theotokos in the early 500s, and John Damascene in the 700s, all of them already have a developed understanding of original sin. Indeed.
All right, so I'm going to stop there for a moment, and here's why. I'm going to give credit to William Albrecht, credit where credit's due. William Albrecht is he's generally not a liberal. That's not where his sympathies are. So the long short of that answer is no, this is what the church has always taught. That's what he's trying to say. That's why he's trying to trace it back into the 4th or 5th century and move forward from there. And we would hope that you really believe that, yes, this was believed since the beginning. Otherwise, why on earth you're believing this? But I think what we saw Mr. Fradd getting at is actually what the majority academic view of Roman Catholicism is, which is patently, no, this was not apostolic. This was not what was originally believed. Now, I'm going to read a quote from Father Gorino. He's the eminent living scholar right now in St. Vincent de Lérins. He wrote a good article on John Henry Newman, and I did an interview with him. And in this interview, I asked him the following. I said, in short, Cardinal Newman thought this practice, that means praying to the saints, was only implicit and not explicit initially, i.e., no one would have initially prayed to Mary. He responded, yes, it is likely that prayer to Mary and the saints was a practice that grew over time under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And so if your criteria for doctrine is that over time it could arise and that's legitimate, then it doesn't really need to be apostolic. It doesn't even really need to be in the 4th or 5th century. It could just appear ultimately in scholastic times, unless by going by John Henry Newman, as long as the premises could exist and you can make these logical conclusions that are consistent with these earlier premises, even if their overall position in the past was in contradiction of the practice, right? So to say the original church did not venerate the saints, but that's somehow consistent with the divinity of Christ, and now that we do, that's saying, well, the seed of the divinity of Christ is what led to the veneration of saints, so that's why it's correct, but the explicit practice of not venerating saints is wrong. That's what the academic view of doctrinal development has led Roman Catholics to believe, despite, I think Father Gorino is very intelligent, very kind, very smart, so I'm not even trying to criticize him. I'm just trying to explain this is what the view really is and why, in the Orthodox mindset, such a view of doctrinal development is dangerous. Now, John, I'm presuming if I were to tell you the veneration of the saints and the Theotokos and angels didn't really exist in the 1st and 2nd century, and we could be Orthodox and believe that, you'd call me a heretic, right?
I don't know if you call you a heretic in the sense, maybe you're just uninformed, but...
All right, let's say I'm a priest and our bishop, and I'm teaching this, and I want people to believe it.
Yeah, I think if you
Cardinal
just think
Newman's
about
a bishop.
I believe veneration of saints always existed, but in time we have more saints, and the Virgin.
But the fact that they were ever venerated, that's the point. Meaning, of course, before she died, they weren't venerating her, right? So the point would be, after the saints died, was there a cult for the saints? If I were to say no, this appeared 4 centuries later, would you consider that an Orthodox statement?
No, I would not, and I don't think there is evidence for that.
Of course not. You'd be a Protestant. And essentially, the academic Roman Catholic view is, if you're an originalist, you're a Protestant. If you buy into this epistemology of development, it could permit you to be Roman Catholic. Yeah. But the Protestants would actually be factually correct. It's just their epistemology isn't suited for the acceptance of new doctrines. And you could call it the same doctrine, it's just been clarified, but it's not a clarification if it didn't exist. It was not even accepted, in fact, rejected when it comes to Immaculate Conception. Right? We have saints that use, like Saint Fulgentius of Rups, who says that Mary was conceived in sin. He actually uses the word conceived. And so we have a later doctrine that actually literally contradicts what saints taught.
I mean, if
You can't have that. No,
yeah,
you can't have
I mentioned before with Elijah that when Christ was on the cross and calling on God, they thought he was calling on Elijah. So even there you have an instance of the people just assuming he's calling on a saint, let's say. So I think it's from the beginning. That's quite clear. They were not materialist in the sense we are.
Second Maccabees chapter, I want to get it right, but I think it's 14. It explicitly says that St. Jeremiah intercedes for the people of God, right? And this is written centuries after his death. So like that's a mainstream Jewish source 150 years before the time of Christ. There really should be no debate about this. And I think what you bring up there in a New Testament source is so important.
Yeah.
Because Protestants will say, well, I don't accept second Maccabees.
Yeah. I think people should also remember that, of course, in the first century, no one was venerating Saint Nicholas because he lived later. But that doesn't mean that they didn't venerate the saints, let's say, that had existed up to that time. So
now, and Father Patrick, what do you think? You think we could be Orthodox and believe that in the first few centuries the saints weren't venerated, but then believe it later?
Yeah, this gets tricky, and it depends on how you address the question. If you're going to address it at a scholastic, historical level, well, we didn't see, huge amounts of evidence for it and stuff like that. And so someone wants to be a little scholastic and a little bit reserved about the forms of it being done. I wouldn't sort of condemn them for that. But in principle, yes, if someone suddenly said, oh, no, it's something just started later on, I would get really troubled by this, and as my PhD was about, was another scholar sort of talking about certain things of the church starting in the 4th century, so a fundamental change in the way the church was doing it, and I just said, you can't have that. It's just not the way apostolic tradition works. And interesting, like the iconoclasm,
someone bought it.
Man, you read more books in English than I do.
Anyway, yeah, we go back into my train of thought again. Oh, dread.
Sorry.
My train of thought. It disappeared off the.
Well, interrupt me. I'll just make this point. My final synopsis of the debate. Who do I think got the better? The other guy, William Albrecht, won in that effect. I think most people walk away, think that he won. This video, if we're lucky, will get 1,000 views, so most people won't see the clarifications. But to anyone who cares about the details, I think his performance is intellectually embarrassing. You cannot stand by such a performance. To have so many things patently wrong, so many things from the saints just wrong, so many quotations lacking. I don't know. I guess I'm happy I am not in that position and have to eat this sort of humble pie. So that's my final opinions on the debate before we get into questions. And Father, if it occurs to you, we can interrupt. But in the meantime, maybe one of the questions will jog your memory.
Indeed. If it hasn't gone to sleep.
It's getting late there. And don't just so people know, I'm sick while I'm doing this, so I'm not feeling so good either.
I just want to say, I actually thought Father Patrick won. And I don't say that to
because you're Greek and you're civilized.
At the liturgy.
Because you're Greek and you're civilized.
Okay, I don't know if we are civilized. We are anarchists, but yeah, that's.
You start well. No, everything started in Greece. That's what my big fat Greek wedding taught me.
Yeah.
So we have. Let's see. So the humans inherit death, but not guilt of Adam. And I just try to make sense of the question, which should be, no, that's the scholastic view, that you could not have guilt, but you could still die. And so that's a scholastic differentiation from Catholicism. But if your question is, do individuals inherit the actual penalty of what Adam literally did, as in we're held as if we did it ourselves, the answer would be no. We know that from Romans 5:14, where it says that those who have sins but not in the likeness of Adam also die. So that would be the answer to that question. Now we got, let's see. Did the Theotokos go through the toll houses? And essentially the answer is no. New Martyr Daniel Sazoyev says the answer is no. By grace, she went right through. There are Domitian homilies where the Theotokos expresses that she fears going through these toll houses, but we don't have an example for really doing it. And we have what I believe to be a saint. We'll have his widow doing an interview, God willing, on the anniversary of his martyrdom. And he says, no, by grace, she was able to avoid the toll houses. So I think that would be the teaching we'd be bound to.
Well, I think there's a number of saints that don't experience that. You see a number of times if there's a pillar of light goes up and the saint is just accompanied with choirs of angels.
Good point.
And saints singing them to heaven. So it's definitely not something. It's a lot of the really holy saints just simply pass through because of their holiness. So it's not. So Mother God definitely would be one of those who was translated. And you the story of Thomas coming and seeing her going up. There was definitely no sense of it. She was anyway being judged or condemned by devils on the way of going up. There was nothing for them to do. I mean, the Jew reached out his hand and it was chopped off for daring to touch her, sort of thing. I think so. Yeah, she would have just gone to heaven in the most glorious fashion possible, and other saints have done so as well, who are less glorious in herself. So.
All right, so we got this question from Ivan, and how about we'll give this to John, and then we'll give Father Patrick a try at it. I've understood that Theotokos is sinless and not before her conception, immaculate, but why is it not possible that God have made her so even before? Because of his grace and love? And so what do you think about that, John?
It's always tricky when you say is it not possible, because then you're going to speculate, and the fathers don't speculate. We don't. My impression of the Orthodox theology is not that we speculate. We accept what we receive from the scriptures, from the Holy Tradition, from which scripture is a part of, from the teachings of the saints, the canon law, liturgics, and that's it, basically. So I think in an Orthodox setting, it becomes a non-question in some sense. There's a lot of things God could have done. But so that's that's really not a response, but that is, I try to...
Good equivocation there, John. What do you say, Father Patrick?
Well, after he says that, I better not speculate on that.
Sorry.
Look, normally, God does or does not do things. Everything he does or whatever happens is always done to the best of our salvation. He's always working the best for that, even if we are really stubborn and get in the way and mess it up. So there is usually, he has a good reason why not. And it usually is about, it'll end up messing up the logic of how things actually all fit together coherently on a deep metaphysical level. I'm not supposed to be. I think it's one part is, I think it actually is important that she starts and saves man from a point of death to undo Eve. It just the balance of the whole system, etc., doesn't quite work if she doesn't. So she so that's the same point. And the other one is I'm a bit stronger on true free will, and that her freedom of acceptance needed to be actually take place before her state was changed. Now, my answer to that all is that God, if she hadn't, God had worked out some other solution, and there was some backup plan, 6,122, that would have done the same thing in the end. It just happens that's the way it is. So we would never have known any different. Because we never know which backup plan this was in any case. But so this was always going to God would have worked this to have. There always eventually would be someone who raises God. So in this case, I think this is quite important, though, that her freedom was involved in this. That she freely said, "Be unto me as the Lord wills," and this cracks Eve's disobedience, and this has to be true freedom. And again, Orthodox very strong on the true freedom of our salvation, that we are saved of our own freedom. It's never forced. There's no compulsion. There's a deep sense of we really want to be this part of God, because God is truly free. We must be truly free in being like God. Otherwise, we can't be like God. And so I think that is the other point, is that it can't be some. And the other point is that's a whole concept of what original sin is. That they are trying to say that she's anything less than human, or the image of God is corrupt or something like that. I just find this appalling. It's just simply the man was separated from the being able to participate in the actual activities of God, and in anticipation that she was open to be doing so freely, doing so. And the matter of death, that she was going to die, because it's going to be sorted out by Christ, as it wasn't a fundamental problem of purity or holiness in any case, or her being the mother of God. Obviously, Christ had to go through death himself. That didn't destroy his union between man and God. So the fact that she had inherited death was going to destroy her ability to be the mother of God, or union. So long as the death could be freed, which was Christ that's why he became incarnate to free. So yeah, anyway.
And I would add that, could God have made a different Eve out of dirt? Like, obviously he made Adam originally that way, right? So he could have made her out of nothing, but he couldn't made her from Adam if she wasn't born from his stock and wasn't born with his sin, meaning the original sin. And so there's that point where if you want this to undo Adam's sin, she needs to be born from Adam. And so you cannot get rid of, being that we need the cooperation of the will, she can't have it where she doesn't have her will cooperating with this grace and choosing this grace. Otherwise, you can't undo what has already been decided through Adam, right? You're not having the right use of the will, correcting the wrong use of the will. So I think that's, go right ahead.
Another point about the pregnant or nothing, actually she had to be a daughter of Adam. She had to be a daughter of, because only through her is all the Old Testament saints retrospectively saved and united as the one body of Christ. That's why it was through her that they don't need to be baptized as we do afterwards. It's through her genetics, her being of that family, and that their justification comes from being bound to death, where their life is actually, she requires to be in the same condition to justify their salvation post fact as well. So I think there's a big thing tied into there, that you're effectively suddenly make her an exception. You cut off the salvation of all the prior saints. It's been one body with Christ, and their condition, and justifying their fallen condition.
I apologize. We're going to try to go through the 2 more questions before we do plugs, simply because I feel legitimately really sick right now. So I'm going to click on this question, which is for John. Would you say Mary is an archetype for all women to live like her, to attain to theosis? So is she like a model for us?
Yeah, not only all women, but all people. She's the mother of all Christians, I say. We call upon her. So absolutely, she's a model.
It's getting late everywhere. It's late here. It's later in England. It's even later in Greece. We have this question lastly for Father Patrick. Does the error of the Immaculate Conception lead to the raising of Mary into a demigod, and thus a potential second commandment violation? If so, has this materially happened in your experience?
I wouldn't quite go to that extent. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I wouldn't make a big point of it because I don't think it's absolutely necessitated by the doctrine. It's, as I said, we actually think of her higher than a demigod. So it sort of puts her at a sort of, actually, the demigod's not a bad thing. Perhaps you could argue, and the way the show sort of says that she becomes more like a Zeus or a Athena, where she's not truly fully God, but she's sort of divine human type thing, which is not really truly participating in the fullness of God, and yet more than just a human. And then you sort of get this demigod sort of feel, which actually sort of sets her as a god opposed to God or beside God, or that may create a sort of a tension of her veneration, which is maybe what the Protestants were reacting against, as opposed to the theosis union with God, where in a sense you're only venerating her as God in God and through God. Is no apart from God, or she's not. She's participating in God. So worshiping God is venerating her. It's not like she's a separate thing that gets her own veneration. So perhaps we could argue that this type of doctrine reinforces or emphasizes a sort of understanding of her as something venerated almost beside God rather than in and through God.
And my disopinion is, for all technical intents and purposes, we have people that were just plain men, like Roman emperors, worshipped as God. So I'm not quite sure if the Theotokos origin or how she originated would be the chief means in which her veneration would be improper or not. Right? We can improperly venerate things that are not gods at all, but inanimate objects, and so that's also possible as well. But I think what the Damascene was getting at when he said we don't worship a goddess because we proclaim her death, I think what he's getting at is, if Theotokos is immune to death, she wasn't born as Adam, then in effect we've made her almost a different nature. Now, I know that's in a real highly technical level, it's incorrect. The human ousia doesn't change. The tropos changes. We want to get into the Greek and St. Maximus. But I just think that was the general point that the Damascene was making, and I think it's good to heed something that's generally true, even if you worked out every detail, you would have to clarify quite a bit. And I'll just say really fast, where would Enoch and Elijah be? Well, Jesus Christ is the right hand of God the Father, and he's in a physical body, so he's geographically somewhere too. So I don't know exactly where, but they in heaven is all I could say. He was carried up to heaven, so the answer is heaven. And so, John, let me give you an opportunity to do some plugs. What are you up to lately? Where are you going with your channel? What's going to happen with you?
What's going to happen to me? I don't know. So please pray. But my channel, it's according to John. You can watch it. Maybe there's something interesting there, or maybe not. And lately I've started a blog type, but it's in Swedish, so it's not relevant to your audience. But that's basically.
I have one Swedish guy that follows me.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure he reads articles too.
Yeah.
All right, so we got according to John. You have any big interviews or debates coming up?
Debate not at this time. I will interview Father. Here? No, I lost his name. That's embarrassing. But Father Stephen the Young. Father Stephen the Young. He has written a new book on the problem of evil, basically from an Orthodox perspective, or something like that. So I'm reading the book right now. And
you ready for the answer? Suffering's redemptive. Christ came, he suffered, it makes us like Christ. Saves your soul. There you go. Answer the problem of evil.
Yeah, thank you. So Yeah, so you can. I will interview him in about 2 weeks, so it will come out soon.
All right, that's good. That's good. And we have Father Patrick here. We got linked to in the info screen in the bottom or whatever. We got your books. So you could be just like John and own Father Patrick's books. You got anything else in the works? Anything else you'd like to plug? You want to talk about the books, Father Patrick?
Not too much in the works. There's a couple of things that someone wants me to get hold of. I'm supposed to be developing more of a sense of the in the West, where it talks about the distinction between essence and energies, or essence and energy. So I'm slowly but trying to work on an article for that at some stage. And apart from that, I just keep busy with other things like trying to be a parish priest and earn some money to survive, and things like that. So that pretty
Guys,
much.
Father Patrick's hungry. Buy his book so he could eat.
Yeah, well, one of my books is Minor Clergy book is most popular, and that's been translated in Romanian. It's been translated in the Greek. It's been published now. You can buy it in the Romanian bookshops. So that's my successful book.
I
the
like.
PhD one is actually, I think, more interesting book and more. Well, I think it's a little bit more profound in the sense it's.
Well, the Romanians disagree.
Well, I'm just getting some good feedback. It's been translated into Romanian as well, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So,
The Greeks disagree.
So no, it's bigger, but it's it was started initially about in the papacy and the difference between that and I call it the place of St. Peter. But in the end, the book, the core of a book is, as I wrote it, came out as a way of understanding theosis through hierarchical relationships, and it's structurally, it's a principle behind all relationships from marriage to bishops to patriarchs, and what's the anthropology behind it, how these work to our salvation. And it's through these relationships that we actually come to salvation, through these relationships, and the whole hierarchical structure from what way children relate to parents, marriages, monasticism, the priesthood and everything. There's a whole hierarchical tiers of these relationships, and it's based on the image of God and man. And this is the structure of our salvation through these relationships, grounded in the mysteries of the church and the traditions of the church. So it came on to me as I wrote it, and I find it's a very useful tool of understanding Orthodox tradition, hierarchies, what's gone wrong with the Roman Catholic papacy, how that's infringed, how we should relate to each other, what is the relationship between a bishop and a priest, what's the relationship between a husband and a wife, and all these sort of things. So if you're interested in that sort of theoretical work, I recommend it, but and please excuse me.
Father, you could Facebook message John's and my wife. Oh, there you go. you could tell them about where their role fits in with the church. I'm going to plug orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. It's right there. You just type in the exact thing, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Quite frankly, next 2 months are very tough months financially for the churches of Cambodia. So if you haven't donated yet, or you've donated before, even it's just $1, please donate something. It's extremely important. We seriously need donors during this time. It's one of the reasons I do this show, because we need support for these churches in Cambodia. And honestly, right now, they're kind of short on donors. Some regular donors are not there. And quite frankly, people give less because it's near Christmas and they got to give money for other stuff. So if this has helped you understand things that didn't come out in the debate on Matt Fradd's channel, and this has been a real asset to you, well, then please bless someone else, and God will bless you. But you can not only, it's not just, of course, of orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Please pray for all of us. for Father Patrick, for myself, for John. Also, please give alms or donate to a monastery that's being faithful, that's staying open during COVID, that is continuing the liturgy and the worship of God, and that we may treat them during these trying times. But please just don't forget, even if it's $1, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. It's extremely important right now. I'm not going to bother you so much after January. Things should get back to normal. But it's really tough right now. And quite frankly, Father Roman, there's no money to go back and visit his family in Russia, for example. Plane tickets cost money. You know, feeding the monk is relatively easy, but we've got a married priest there with 2 kids. And so we need to support them, let alone take care of the buildings, let alone translate works into Cambodian, Khmer, so we can convert people to the Christian faith. So please be part of something important. You see those videos online about Orthodox evangelism. Well, become part of it. And you could do that, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Every single penny goes to the churches in Cambodia. So this is not like one of those charities where 90% makes it. Every single penny makes it to the churches in Cambodia. And that'd be a real blessing to the people there. So anyway, that being said, Father Patrick, John, it's I think late for all of us. I think we're all dying. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real blessing and real pleasure.
Pleasure too.
Thank you for the invitation, and I hope the Virgin will keep us all.
Yes.
Yes, through the prayers, Theotokos, so Savior, save us. And so I will end this show as I end all our shows by quoting Jesus Sirach, who said, "Fight to death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you all. Have a great day."